The saloon doors creaked under the weight of silence. No piano played. No laughter spilled from poker tables. Even the whiskey sat untouched on the counter. Every man inside froze when he entered the one they called Lazare Duval. His boots dragged dust with them, his hat shadowing eyes too hollow to meet. Some said he had no soul left, that he walked this earth like a ghost waiting to be buried. His coat, long and torn, carried stains no rain had washed away. Mothers pulled their sons closer and gamblers folded their cards before a single word was spoken. Lazare never smiled, never laughed. He just breathed slowly, heavily, and dangerously. He moved toward the bar, his spurs whispering across the wooden floor. The barkeep, a trembling man named Gayton, slid him a glass of bourbon without being asked. Lazare lifted it with scarred fingers, hands that had pulled too many triggers. The whole saloon watched, breaths caught, waiting. Then came the cruelest sound, a voice from the corner. A drunk rancher, half brave and half fool, spat, "Ain't you the one who let your whole family burn? That's what they say, ghost man. That you just watched." The air cracked with tension. Nobody dared blink. Lazare's jaw tightened, the bourbon trembling in his hand. He set the glass down, untouched. His eyes, gray as ash, lifted toward the man who had spoken. They carried no rage, no fire, just emptiness that chilled every bone in the room. "Say it again," Lazare whispered, his voice thin as a blade's edge. The rancher stammered, choking on his own courage, but the damage was done. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had seen Lazare freeze at the mention of his family. For the first time the ghost flickered. Not rage. Not grief. Something deeper, buried and deadly. And the saloon knew they were no longer safe. Then the unexpected. Lazare didn't draw his gun. He didn't strike. He simply turned, his coat swaying like a shadow, and walked out. The doors slammed behind him, leaving the rancher trembling in his chair, eyes wide with regret. Outside, the wind howled through the street, whipping dust into a storm. Lazare's figure disappeared into it, swallowed by the very earth, like a spirit retreating to its grave. No man followed. No man dared. For in that silence, they all understood there was something worse than death walking among them. And as the storm rolled over the town of St. Ravine, a single thought haunted every whisper. If Lazare Duval was truly a ghost, then what sin had chained him here? The night Lazare vanished into the dust, whispers spread faster than whiskey. Some said he had been cursed. Others swore he had bargained with death itself. But the truth lived in the ashes of memory, a story buried under fire and shame. Years earlier, St. Ravine was not a town of silence. It was alive. Children chased each other down the dirt roads, women hung laundry under the wide prairie sky, and men argued in the forge about cattle prices. Lazare was not yet the ghost man. He was a husband, a father, a neighbor. He had a wife with dark braids and eyes that glowed like lanterns at dusk. Her name was Soline. And a daughter, little Clemence, who carried a laugh sweet enough to soften even the hardest outlaw. That was before the fire. Before the night St. Ravine swallowed them whole, that it began with a feud no one in town wanted but everyone feared. The Beaumont clan, men with black hats and blacker hearts, had sworn vengeance on Lazare's brother Etienne. A card game gone wrong. A pistol fired too fast. Blood spilled where none should have. Lazare begged Etienne to leave town, to ride west and vanish, but pride is a cruel disease. Etienne stayed, gambling again, drinking again, stirring trouble. And when the Beaumonts returned, they didn't look for Etienne. They looked for blood. They found Lazare's home. That night, the flames rose higher than the chapel's cross, and screams cut through the wind like broken glass. Lazare fought like a madman, his rifle spitting fire into the dark. But the Beaumonts were too many, too fast. He dragged Soline through the smoke, carrying her across the yard as burning beams collapsed behind them. He turned back for Clemence, only to hear the roof groan and crumble. The fire swallowed her laughter in one cruel breath. Lazare's scream was not human. It was the cry of a man torn in half, echoing through St. Ravine like thunder. Neighbors pulled him back, but his fists beat against them until his strength broke. When the embers cooled, the only thing left of his daughter was a charred ribbon caught in the fence. He held it in his hands until dawn, whispering her name until his voice bled. The town buried Soline and Clemence on the same hill where the prairie grass swayed. Etienne never came. He vanished into the desert, leaving Lazare alone with graves and ghosts. For weeks, he wandered St. Ravine without speaking, his eyes hollow, his body moving but his soul elsewhere. They began to call him the ghost man in whispers, a man half alive, cursed to walk. Lazare never denied it. He wore the name like a shroud. Each day he polished his revolver but never touched whiskey, never gambled, never smiled. Only silence followed him, and silence was louder than any gunshot. But silence never lasts in the West. Not when blood debts are unpaid. The Beaumonts had burned his family, but they were not finished. They wanted him broken, wanted him hunted until he vanished like his brother. Yet Lazare did not run. He stayed in St. Ravine, haunting it like the last survivor of a war nobody else fought. And the town, caught between fear of the Beaumonts and pity for Lazare, chose silence too. They left him to wander, a ghost among the living, waiting for the day his shadow would rise against theirs. And deep down, everyone in St. Ravine knew it was only a matter of time. The desert sun burned St. Ravine like a furnace, yet Lazare felt nothing. He sat outside the blacksmith's shop, hat pulled low, eyes staring at dust that never stopped moving. Years had passed since the fire, but every morning smelled like smoke to him. Every wind carried echoes of his daughter's laugh. He lived like a shadow, drifting from day to day, avoiding faces, avoiding voices. But one afternoon the stillness cracked. A rider came thundering down the main road, horse foaming, eyes wide with terror. He was no stranger. He was a farm boy named Malo, barely old enough to grow whiskers. His words stumbled through his breath. "They're back, the Beaumonts. They're coming for St. Ravine." And just like that, the quiet ghost man became the town's only hope. The townsfolk gathered in the square, their voices tangled with fear. Old men muttered about packing wagons and leaving. Mothers clutched their children tighter. The sheriff, a man named Armand Dupré, looked at Lazare. Everyone did. The ghost man who had once faced the Beaumonts alone. But Lazare did not speak. His jaw clenched, his eyes stayed fixed on the dirt. Armand stepped closer, whispering so the others wouldn't hear. "You can't keep living like this, Lazare. They'll burn us all." Still silence. Lazare's silence was a wound, and the whole town bled from it. At last, Armand's hand touched his shoulder. Lazare flinched not from the touch, but from the memory it pulled open. Fire. Screams. Loss. And he whispered back, a voice low and graveled, "I warned Etienne. I begged him. And now they come for me. Not for you." But the Beaumonts never wanted just one man. Their vengeance was a hunger that spread like wildfire. That night, while the town whispered behind shutters, Lazare sat at the graves of Soline and Clements. The moon lit their names on wooden crosses, and his hands trembled against the earth. He spoke to them like he always did, words broken, voice soft. "I've walked like a ghost so long, maybe it's time I let the ghost go." His revolver lay beside him, polished, loaded. A tool he had sworn not to draw again. He picked it up, spun the chamber and pressed it against the dirt between the graves. "If I fight, I die. If I stay silent, they all burn." The night answered with only wind, carrying the smell of sage and ash. Morning came with hoofbeats. The Beaumonts were not whispers anymore, they were real. Black horses, black dust, black hearts. They rode down the hills, rifles strapped, laughter sharp as knives. The town rang the warning bell and panic scattered. Children cried, men grabbed rusted shotguns, women prayed under their breath. And Lazare stood at the edge of the road, coat buttoned, hat tilted, revolver holstered at his side. His eyes were no longer hollow. They burned not with life but with something darker. Something sharpened by grief. The people gasped to see him there, the ghost man alive again, standing in the light for the first time in years. The Beaumonts slowed their horses when they saw him. The leader, a tall brute named Cassian Beaumont, smiled through crooked teeth. His voice cut the air like a whip. "Well, look who crawled out of his grave." Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. Lazare did not move. Did not blink. His silence was heavier than any insult. Cassian dismounted, boots striking dust, hand resting on his pistol. "You took my brother's life. Now I'll take you slow." The crowd held its breath. The desert seemed to stop moving. Lazare's hand hovered near his revolver, and for the first time in years the ghost man whispered words meant for the living. "Try." The first shot shattered the silence. A bottle on a porch rail exploded into glass as Cassian's pistol barked. The town screamed and scattered, mothers dragging children into cellars, old men slamming shutters closed. But Lazare didn't flinch. His boots stayed planted, his hand steady above the revolver at his hip. Cassian grinned, circling him like a wolf around prey. "Still frozen, ghost? Or have you forgotten how to bleed?" Behind him, the Beaumont gang laughed, rifles raised, eager for a slaughter. And yet, Lazare's stillness was not fear, it was patience. A storm building slowly, waiting for the strike. Sheriff Armand stepped into the dust, shotgun trembling in his grip. His voice cracked as he called out, "Cassian, This is Saint Ravine, not your hunting ground. You take your men and ride out, or Cashin's pistol roared again and Armand's hat spun off his head, a bullet hole through its brim. Laughter erupted from the gang. The sheriff froze, sweat running down his temple. Lazare's edition. He had buried his fight for years, but he would not bury another innocent. Slowly his hand fell to the revolver. Fingers curled around the grip. The sound of leather creaking was enough to make the gang fall silent. Cashin saw it and his grin faltered. This was not the broken man they had mocked for years. This was the Lazare who once faced 4 Beaumont brothers and lived. For the first time, Cashin's eyes flickered not with fear but recognition. Lazare tilted his head, his voice steady, gravel cutting through the wind. Leave. Or join your brother. The words were death sentences, quiet and certain. The crowd, huddled in shadows, gasped. This was the ghost they remembered, the man who did not bluff. Cashin spat into the dirt, anger swallowing his smirk. Then you've chosen the end. Gunfire erupted like thunder. Bullets ripped through wood and glass as the Beaumonts unleashed fury on the town. Horses screamed, barns splintered, dust rose in violent clouds. Lazare moved like smoke, swift, silent, untouchable. His revolver barked once and a Beaumont fell from his saddle. Twice and another crumpled into the dust. The people of Saint Ravine watched in awe, breathless, as the ghost man they thought long dead fought with fire in his veins. But for every Beaumont who dropped, another surged forward. It was not a battle, it was a storm. And Saint Ravine stood at its center. By the time the smoke cleared, 3 Beaumonts lay broken in the dirt, their blood mixing with the dust. Cashin stood, chest heaving, rage etched into every scar on his face. He glared at Lazare, eyes burning with vengeance deeper than hate. This isn't over, he spat, retreating to his horse. The survivors followed, dragging their wounded with them. As the hoofbeats faded into the desert, Saint Ravine stood in shaken silence. Children peeked from windows, elders whispered prayers. And there, in the middle of the road, Lazare Holst stood alone, breathing heavy, coat torn, revolver smoking. For a moment the people believed. For a moment the ghost was alive. But in Lazare's eyes, there was no victory. Only the shadow of fire still to come. The morning after the gunfight, Saint Ravine looked like a town that had survived a hurricane. Shattered windows glittered in the dirt, the saloon's doors hung crooked, and bullet holes marked every wall like scars. Families swept glass from porches, patched roofs and buried the dead. Among them Lazare walked silent, his hat pulled low, revolver heavy at his side. He had defended them, yes, but with his return came blood. Children stared at him with wide eyes, torn between fear and awe. Old men whispered his name like a curse. To them Lazare was no savior. He was the storm that called other storms. Near the chapel, Sister Elodie found him. She was young, no more than 30, but her face carried years of weight, lined by dust and sleepless nights. Her eyes burned not with anger but disappointment. You promised yourself peace, Lazare, she said softly. And yet here you are again, hands painted red. He wanted to answer, but no words came. His voice felt like gravel stuck in his throat. She touched his arm firm. These people buried children because of men like Cashin. If you fight, more will die. And yet, if you do not fight, all will die. What will you choose? Lazare could only lower his eyes, the silence heavier than bullets. That night, Lazare sat outside the old blacksmith's forge, staring at the horizon. The desert glowed orange beneath the dying sun, the sky painted in blood. He cleaned his revolver in silence, every click echoing like a confession. He thought of Marcel, his brother, who once rode beside him before greed pulled them apart. Marcel had betrayed him, left him broken in the canyon years ago. And now, Cashin the younger Beaumont was Marcel's shadow made flesh. Lazare's hand trembled as he loaded the final bullet. It was not just Cashin he faced. It was the ghost of his own past. The people of Saint Ravine gathered in whispers that same night. Sheriff Armand, his pride wounded, demanded Lazare leave town. He'll bring nothing but fire down on us, Armand snapped, slamming his fist on the table. We cannot survive another storm. But the blacksmith argued, without him we'd already be corpses in the dust. The room erupted, some pleading for Lazare to stay, others begging him to go. And in the corner, Sister Elodie sat silent, eyes closed in prayer, waiting for God's whisper in the chaos. The town was split. But they all knew one truth: Cashin Beaumont would return. Lazare stood apart from them all, alone beneath the chapel bell. His hands hung heavy, his shoulders bent like an old oak about to fall. He did not fear Cashin, no, fear had long ago left him. What he feared was himself. He feared the fire he could not control, the violence that always followed. His life was not life. It was survival. And survival had turned him into something less than human. In that moment, Lazare Holst realized the cruelest truth of all. He was living his life like a ghost. And the world was already digging his grave. The night air was thick as if the desert itself held its breath. Cassian Beaumont rode into campfires along the canyon ridge, his men restless around him. Their faces flickered in firelight. Outlaws, drifters, men with nothing left but violence. Cassian's jaw was sharp, his eyes colder than steel, his smile thin as a knife's edge. He had tasted humiliation, and humiliation was poison. He would not swallow it twice. Holding up a bottle of whiskey, he shouted, "Saint Ravine thinks they found a ghost to protect them. Let us remind them ghosts can bleed too." The men cheered, their voices echoing off canyon walls like wolves before a hunt. By dawn, smoke curled above the farmlands. Cassian's riders set fire to wheat fields and drove cattle into the ravine. Women screamed, children cried, and men scrambled with buckets. But fire eats faster than hands can throw water. Lazare rode hard into the chaos, dust whipping his coat, eyes sharp beneath his brim. He drew his revolver and fired once into the sky, the sound cracking through the madness like a thunderclap. Everyone froze, bandits, farmers and children. Lazare dismounted slowly, the ghost of a man walking among flames, his shadow long in the smoke. Cassian appeared through the haze, his stallion dark and foaming at the mouth. He tipped his hat mockingly, smiling down at Lazare. "Still haunting the living, Holst?" he called, his voice smooth but venomous. Lazare didn't answer. His silence was heavier than words. Cassian smirked, "You can't save them. You couldn't save your own brother. And you won't save this town." Lazare's jaw clenched, but his eyes remained calm, unreadable. He raised his revolver slowly, deliberately, and pointed it straight at Cassian's chest. For a moment, time stopped. Then came chaos. Shots rang out, dirt kicked into the air, horses screamed. The outlaws charged through burning fields and townsfolk scattered, some picking up rifles, others hiding their families. Lazare moved like lightning, every bullet finding its mark, yet every step dragged him deeper into his old self. The killer, the ghost, the man who lived only through blood. Children cried as the barns collapsed. Cassian's laughter echoed through the smoke, wild and taunting as he vanished back into the dust, leaving destruction behind. When the flames died, St. Ravine was broken. The fields were gone, livestock stolen, hope hanging by a thread. Sheriff Armand knelt in the ashes, shaking his head. "We can't win this war," he muttered. Sister Elodie looked at Lazare, her voice trembling. "If you keep fighting alone, he will destroy us all. You cannot carry this weight by yourself." But Lazare said nothing. He walked into the smoldering ruins, his coat torn, his face shadowed, his figure fading like smoke. He was winning battles and losing his soul. The morning after the fire was cruelly quiet. Ash hung in the air like falling snow, and the sky carried a dull gray that pressed on everyone's shoulders. Lazare stood at the edge of the fields, staring at blackened stalks that once promised life. He heard children asking their mothers what they would eat, old men cursing the wind, and young men vowing revenge. Yet Lazare remained silent, his shadow long against the dying land. To the people he was a savior. To himself he was only a ghost walking through ruins he couldn't prevent. His hands shook as he holstered his revolver. Every life he failed to protect was another stone on his chest. Sheriff Armand rode out to him, the lines of exhaustion etched deep into his face. "You've got the town believing in you," the sheriff said, lowering his voice. "But ghosts don't win wars. Men do. And right now, St. Ravine needs a man." Lazare looked at him, but his eyes were hollow. "You don't know what I've done, Armand," he whispered. "If they did, they'd drive me out faster than the flames." The sheriff didn't press him, though the weight of Lazare's words lingered. Secrets had a way of poisoning even the strongest. That night, Sister Elodie visited Lazare in the small cabin on the edge of town where he stayed. She found him sitting in the dark, only the glow of a lantern reflecting in his weary eyes. She placed a bowl of stew in front of him but knew he wouldn't touch it. "They see you as hope," she said softly. "But you see yourself as a shadow." "Why?" Lazare finally spoke, his voice heavy as stone. "Because shadows can't protect anyone. My brother Bastien followed me once. He trusted me. And because of me he's buried under desert sand." Elodie's eyes softened, yet her words were firm. "The past cannot be unburied, Lazare. But the living still need you." As midnight approached, Lazare dreamed of Bastien. He saw him as he once was laughing, riding beside him, the desert wind in their hair. Then came the gunfire, the betrayal, the silence. Lazare woke drenched in sweat, his chest tight. Outside his window the desert howled. He poured whiskey into a tin cup and stared at his reflection, a man unrecognizable, hollow-eyed, fading. He whispered to himself, "A ghost doesn't save towns. He buries them." And for the first time he considered leaving St. Ravine to its fate. But when dawn came, a boy appeared at his cabin door. Barefoot, face streaked with ash, the child looked up at Lazare with trembling lips. "Monsieur Holst," he said, voice quivering, "my father died fighting last night. But before he fell he said he'd keep us safe." Lazare froze. His breath caught, his hand gripping the doorframe. The boy's eyes held no doubt, no fear, only belief. And in that fragile belief, Lazare saw chains heavier than iron. He wanted to run. Instead he placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, the ghost forced to pretend at life once more. The town of St. Ravine tried to rebuild, hammering broken fences and salvaging what hadn't burned. Yet every nail driven into it sounded to Lazare like a drumbeat of his failures. He worked in silence, shoulders hunched, eyes distant. The boy who came to him still lingered in his mind, his words chaining Lazare tighter than any prison. He couldn't leave now, not with children looking at him like he was their shield. But each day that passed, the ghost inside him grew heavier. He had sworn to himself never to lead men again, never to stand where Bastien once fell. In the saloon whispers spread. Travelers passing through told stories of a bandit leader who had risen in the east, a man who knew his enemy's weaknesses before the fight even began. His name, Cashin Morval. To most it was just a rumor. But to Lazare it was a name carved in blood. He knew that voice, that laughter, that face. Cashin wasn't just any outlaw, he was the man who had betrayed Bastien. Lazare clenched his glass so hard it cracked, amber whiskey spilling across the counter. The ghost of his brother's last breath returned to him, louder than ever. That night, Cashin's men struck again, this time cutting the water lines that fed St. Ravine. Horses lay dead in the dirt, their bellies swollen with poison. Women wept, children coughed, and men spat curses. Sheriff Armand tried to rally them, but fear spread faster than fire. Cashin wasn't fighting to win quickly, he was bleeding them slowly, starving them into surrender. And somewhere in the darkness, Lazare knew Cashin was waiting, savoring every second of his torment. The outlaw didn't just want St. Ravine. He wanted Lazare broken. Lazare sat alone at the edge of town, the dry wind clawing at his face. He whispered Bastien's name like a prayer, though he'd long stopped believing in God. He remembered the night Cashin betrayed them, a deal gone wrong, shots in the dark, and Bastien falling into the dirt with eyes wide open. Lazare had sworn he'd never speak of it, not to anyone. Now, Cashin was here to rip open wounds he had buried deep. He felt Elodie's hand on his shoulder. "You know this man?" she said quietly, not asking but stating. Lazare didn't reply. His silence was the answer. As the moon rose, the bell tower tolled. A messenger stumbled into town, half dead, clutching a blood-stained scrap of cloth. He gasped out only 2 words before collapsing, "Cashin waits." The cloth was no ordinary fabric. It was Bastien's old bandana, dirted and torn but unmistakable. Lazare stared at it, his heart slamming against his ribs. Cashin was not just attacking the town. He was calling Lazare out, dragging his ghost into the light. And now, everyone in St. Ravine would soon learn the truth Lazare had tried so hard to bury. The bandana lay on the saloon table like a curse. Rough hands reached out, touching its worn edges, and murmurs filled the room. The people of St. Ravine had seen Lazare quiet, seen him haunted but never broken. Tonight, though, his face told them everything. The man they called their reluctant savior was tied to Cashin Morval, the same devil tearing their lives apart. Sheriff Armand slammed his fist on the table. "Tell us, Lazare. What devilry ties you to that man?" The room held its breath, the silence more suffocating than any smoke. Lazare stared at the floor as if hoping it would swallow him whole. He rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the wooden walls. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Cashin was once my brother in arms. Bastien, my real brother, trusted him. We both did. But Cashin betrayed us. Bastien died in my arms that night and Cashin lived." The words cut deeper than any blade and the townsfolk recoiled. To them, betrayal was the blackest sin, worse than theft, worse than murder. The widow by the door whispered, "And now he comes for us because of you?" Lazare's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. His silence was heavier than confession. The saloon erupted in anger. Men shouted, fists slammed against tables. One farmer hurled his drink, shattering glass against the wall. "You brought this curse on us," he roared. "Cashin hunts you, not us. Leave and he'll follow." Others nodded, fear twisting their faces. Sheriff Armand raised his voice, but it cracked under the pressure. Elodie, standing tall despite trembling hands, cut through the chaos. "He stayed when none of you had the courage. He bled for this town while you cowered. Don't you dare speak of abandoning him now." Her defiance stunned them into silence, though mistrust still burned in their eyes. Lazare felt the walls closing in. These people didn't understand Cashin would never stop with him. He wanted more than vengeance. He wanted to destroy everything Lazare touched, every soul that dared to depend on him. Even if Lazare left, St. Ravine would burn. He stepped outside into the night air, the cold cutting through him sharper than a blade. His eyes drifted toward the mountains, where Cashin was no doubt watching, waiting. A shadow among shadows. Lazare whispered, "You want me, brother? Then come and take me." His words were stolen by the wind, but his heart felt them burn. That night, dreams clawed at Lazare's sleep. He saw Bastien again lying in the dirt, blood seeping through his shirt. "You let me die," the ghost said, eyes pale and accusing. Cashin's laughter echoed through the dream, sharp as rattlesnake fangs. Lazare woke drenched in sweat, his revolver in hand though no threat was near. The bandana sat folded on the table beside him, the last piece of Bastien. Lazare knew then Cashin would not stop until the ground of St. Ravine was soaked in blood. And unless he faced the man, his ghost would devour him alive. Dawn broke with a crimson haze, the horizon painted like spilled blood. St. Ravine awoke not to birdsong but to the distant thunder of hooves. Mothers dragged children inside, shutters slammed, and prayers spilled from trembling lips. Sheriff Armand rang the warning bell, its clang echoing through the valley. Lazare stepped into the street, his revolver heavy at his hip. His eyes narrowed toward the ridge. Dust rose in the distance, and at its head rode Cashin Morval, dark hat low, a grin splitting his scarred face. Behind him trailed a dozen riders, rifles gleaming in the early light. The sky itself seemed to darken. Cashin stopped at the edge of town, his men fanning out like wolves. He tipped his hat, his voice carrying clear across the silence. "St. Ravine, you harbor a ghost who owes me blood. Give him to me and I'll spare your sorry hides. Refuse and I'll paint your streets with fire." His men whooped and fired shots into the air. The town flinched, every soul shaking. Lazare's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead he walked forward, boots crunching in the dust. Cashin's grin widened. "Ah, there he is. The shadow himself." Their eyes locked, brotherhood long dead, hatred alive as fire. The sheriff tried to stand tall. "Cashin, this town won't bend to you." His words sounded brave, but his hands trembled. Cashin chuckled, then snapped his fingers. A rider galloped forward, dragging a bound figure. Gasps erupted. It was a boy no older than 14, face bruised, rope biting into his wrists. Cashin shoved him into the dirt. "First taste of mercy, Sheriff. Deny me again, and next time it won't be a boy, it'll be your woman. Your children. You're old." The boy cried out, and silence fell heavier than a grave. Lazare's fists clenched. He knew Cashin too well, every threat he made he kept. Elodie broke from the crowd, fury in her eyes. "Monster. This town has done nothing to you." Cashin laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. It sheltered him. "That's enough sin." He nodded toward Lazare, savoring the tension. "You see, Elodie, ghosts don't stay buried. They haunt. And this one dragged you all into my noose." Lazare stepped forward, voice steady but sharp. "Enough. Leave them out of this. You came for me, Cashin. Here I stand." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Cashin's grin faltered. Not with fear but with delight. He had what he wanted, Lazare ready to bleed. Cashin raised his hand, signaling his riders. Guns cocked, eyes gleamed. But instead of unleashing them, he simply tipped his hat again. "Tomorrow night," he said, voice smooth as poison. "On the valley ridge, beneath the dead oak. You and me, Lazare. One man leaves. If you don't come, I'll burn this town until nothing but ash and bones remain." With that, he turned his horse and thundered away, his riders trailing like storm clouds. The people of St. Ravine stared at Lazare, some with hope, others with dread. Elodie touched his arm, whispering, "You can't face him alone." Lazare's eyes stayed on the horizon. "I was born to." The valley ridge loomed in the distance like a scar across the land. At its center stood the dead oak, its twisted branches reaching skyward like bones clawing at heaven. The people of Saint Ravine whispered of it as cursed ground, a place where no grass dared grow. Now it has been chosen as the stage for a reckoning. Lazare spent the day in silence, sharpening the edge of his revolver with oil-stained hands. Every stroke was a memory, every breath a prayer. He didn't speak aloud. Elodie watched from the doorway, unable to step closer, afraid her presence might break him before the fight. Sheriff Armand entered, hat in hand, eyes weighed by fear. "You can't do this alone, Lazare. We'll stand with you." Lazare shook his head. "Cashin wants me, not the town. If you follow, he'll kill you all. That man doesn't bluff." Armand looked at him long, then nodded with reluctance. "Then you better finish it." Lazare didn't answer. He simply strapped on his belt, the leather creaking, the revolver gleaming cold. To him, tomorrow wasn't a duel, it was a burial. He just didn't know whose name the grave would bear. As night fell, Lazare walked to the edge of Saint Ravine. Children huddled in doorways, staring at him like they were watching a ghost walk to its rest. Elodie caught his arm. "Why him, Lazare? What ties bind you two?" Lazare's eyes darkened, shadows flickering in them. "Blood. Once we shared it. Now it's poison." Her lips parted in shock, but before she could press, he turned away, leaving only silence behind. That one word, blood, rattled in her chest like a bell tolling doom. At dawn, Lazare rode alone to the ridge. The world was quiet, the air thick with waiting. The dead oak rose before him, jagged and skeletal, a silhouette against the gray sky. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the dry earth. Every instinct told him to run, but his soul was chained to this ground. He thought of his brother's laugh, once warm, now venom. He thought of the first time he'd seen Cashin spill blood without mercy. That day, Lazare swore he would never become what his brother had become. Now he wondered if that vow had already been broken. He stood under the dead oak, hat low, revolver heavy at his side. The wind whispered through the hollow branches, carrying the taste of dust and iron. The ridge stretched empty before him, but he felt Cashin's presence like a storm pressing against his chest. For a moment he closed his eyes. Not to pray for survival, but for strength to end this no matter the cost. Behind him, hidden in the folds of the valley, townsfolk gathered in secret, watching their fate balance on two men's shoulders. The ghost and the viper, bound by blood, waiting for the first strike. Cashin arrived at the dead oak at mid-morning, riding a black stallion as if carved from shadow. His hat was tilted low, hiding the scar across his left cheek, a scar Lazare had given him years ago. The two men stood in silence as the stallion snorted and pawed the dirt, the oak creaking like it was groaning under the weight of history. Lazare's chest tightened. This was not just a duel, it was the unearthing of everything buried between them. Cashin dismounted with slow grace, his spurs ringing like knives on stone. "You still walk like a ghost, brother?" he said, voice smooth but dripping with venom. Lazare's hands clenched at his side. "And you still breathe like a serpent. Tell me, how many lives did you choke out this time?" Cashin smirked, eyes flashing. "Enough to remind the world who I am. And enough to remind them who you are not." The words stung more than Lazare cared to admit. The townsfolk hidden in the ridges held their breath, the truth of their bond striking harder than any bullet. Lazare finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Do you remember Mama's hands? The way she prayed for us at night? She begged us to protect each other, to be brothers. You killed that prayer, Cashin." Cashin's smile faded, a flicker of something softer in his eyes before it hardened again. "Mama prayed for lambs. But wolves were born." The tension coiled tighter. Cashin drew his revolver halfway from the holster, metal gleaming under the gray sun. Lazare didn't flinch. "I'm not here to prove who's stronger. I'm here to stop you." Cashin tilted his head, eyes burning. "Stop me? You can't stop what you are. You're me, Lazare. Just weaker." His words tore through Lazare, but he stood tall, jaw set, his ghostly calm unbroken. Behind him, Elodie gasped from her hidden spot among the townsfolk. The revelation was too heavy, brothers now enemies. The dead oak groaned again as if marking the moment. The ground seemed to still be beneath their boots. Two revolvers, two bloodlines, two souls chained to the same cursed fate. Cashin's smile returned, sharp and cold. "Let's see, brother, which one of us Mama's prayers truly favored." The duel hadn't begun, but every heartbeat felt like a bullet already fired. The silence broke with the cry of a hawk overhead. Its wings sliced across the gray sky, and then, like fate itself had pulled the trigger, Cashin's revolver snapped upward. The first shot screamed across the dust, grazing Lazare's sleeve and tearing the cloth. The crowd hiding in the rocks gasped as the sound echoed like thunder across the canyon. Lazare did not move, his calm so ghostly it sent chills through every watcher. His pale eyes locked on Cashin's, not with fear but with sorrow. Cashin stepped forward, boots crunching dry earth. "Too slow," he hissed, spinning the revolver in his hand like a showman. Lazare drew his weapon at last, but not in a flourish. He drew it steady, like a man lifting the weight of his own grave. The stallion whinnied, rearing back as if even the beast knew blood was about to stain the ground. Cashin's grin widened, his scar twisting with it. "Fight me, brother. Or die trying." Lazare fired. The crack split the air, sending dust into the sky. Cashin jerked back, but not from pain. The bullet had struck the trunk of the dead oak inches from his head, splintering wood. Lazare's aim was perfect. He had missed on purpose. The message was clear, he didn't want to kill him. "This ends without blood, Cashin," Lazare called, voice raw. "It ends because I refuse to let you turn me into what you are." Cashin's grin twisted into rage. He fired again, this time grazing Lazare's shoulder. Blood dripped onto his shirt, a bright stain spreading like a wound in the earth itself. Lazare winced but did not fall. The crowd flinched as one, torn between fear and awe at the man who stood as still as death itself. Cashin spat into the dirt. "Always the coward. You can't even finish what you start." His voice trembled beneath the fury, betraying the smallest fracture in his mask. The air between them grew hotter, thicker, until even the wind seemed to halt. Lazare tightened his grip, breathing steady, his ghost-like calm now unshakable. Every soul watching knew the duel was no longer about bullets, it was about whether mercy could outlast rage. Two brothers, one heart split in half, standing beneath a dying oak. And in the dust, the truth settled heavy. One of them would not walk away.